Pokemon Go's July Community Day has been announced to be the Poliwag Community Day. On July 30th, Shiny Poliwag will be spawning more in the wild during the standard Community Day hours, and if you evolve Poliwag all the way into either a Poliwrath or a Politoed, you'll get special Community Day attacks. The Poliwrath is going to be getting Counter as a fast move, which is a huge deal for Poliwrath, and then Politoed is getting Ice Beam, which is kind of just okay. Maybe it's why there are GIFs down here. Poliwrath is looking a lot more excited than Politoed is for this update. But yeah, in this video, I'm going to be talking about just how good these attacks are going to be for these Pokemon, what meta changes we might see in Pokemon Go following this Community Day. And I mean, obviously, Counter on a fighting type Pokemon, that's a pretty big deal. And then as far as the other parts of the event goes, it's not a Stardust event, so I guess we don't have to be excited for that. But it is, two pretty meta Pokemon, so plenty of excitement for the July Community Day. Starting out with Poliwrath in the Great League, I think the first Pokemon to compare it to is definitely going to be the Medicham, because they're both counter users, and they have similar stat product. You can see that Poliwrath does have about 150 less stat product than Medicham, which is significant, but it's not that big of a deal. I think the main thing that is kind of big for this is going to be the difference in their resistance profile, Water type generally being a really strong resistance type, where Psychic is kind of a bit mediocre. Medicham makes it work because of its high bulk and because it's a counter user that can beat other counter users thanks to the Psychic subtyping. But overall, Water is a stronger defensive type. When it comes to their move pools, we both got Counter, we both got Ice Punch, and then we both have that very okay neutral attack that has a debuff chance. So they are pretty similar Pokemon in a lot of ways. They both also carry the Dynamic Punch and the Power Up Punch, which is kind of interesting. The main difference with the Poliwrath here is that we got Hydro Pump for a high energy cost nuke attack, which could be pretty spicy, especially if you got the Shadow bonus going on. That's another thing for Poliwrath too that is different than the Medicham, is that you could boost its damage a bit further by going with the Shadow Poliwrath. And from the simulations I've run so far, I feel like Shadow Poliwrath is going to be a bit better than the normal Poliwrath. So what advantages does Poliwrath have over Medicham? Well, I think first and foremost, we do have the option to Shadow Boost the Poliwrath, which does give us Shadow Boosted Ice Punches, which can help out against Flying type Pokemon and Grass type Pokemon. Grass types in general aren't going to be great for Poliwrath. It is kind of a big problem because it can't tank anything from them, unlike the Medicham, but the Boosted Ice Punches are definitely helpful there. Mostly against the Flying types, though. That's like the big ticket item. Other cool thing about Poliwrath 2 is that it takes neutral damage from Ghost type hits and resists Dark type attacks, which is better than what Medicham has going on. Because they have similar HP pools, with the change in type effectiveness, Poliwrath is a bit more resilient against them. So that can be really helpful against a handful of Ghost types, not named Jellicent, and then also against Pokemon that use Dark type attacks. One of the main things here is going to be that Sableye matchup, where you also have Scald to throw at it instead of the weak, unboosted Ice type attacks. You can actually use your bigger attack into the Sableye. So those I think are the main advantages that Poliwrath has. Obviously, Poliwrath has its problems, like you're up against a Lantern. Lantern ain't a great matchup for Medicham, but Medicham doesn't get like annihilated by Thunderbolt. You've got like Azumarill, Tapu Fini, other water types in general. You got Psychic to throw at them, and unless you're running Dynamic Punch, Poliwrath only has its counter damage to really rely on. So what's the overall impression of counter Poliwrath here? Well, it's not exactly replacing Medicham, but it is a really powerful, unique option for the Great League. It's not really like Copium, it's its own unique kind of thing, and we probably will be seeing it in GBL and possibly in the C6 tournaments as well. In the C6 tournaments, to play Pokemon tournaments, there are plenty of reasons to like bring not Medicham, right? And Poliwrath has its unique bag of tricks that could make it more desirable than the Medicham. But big problem is probably going to be the Registeel situation overall. Going down a shield against Registeel, especially when your moveset leaves you vulnerable to getting farmed down by the next thing in, it's just not a great look for Poliwrath. But I think overall Poliwrath is going to be a powerful option in the Great League meta. When it comes to the Ultra League meta, I'm not exactly an Ultra League specialist here, but I know Jellicent is pretty popular up there, same with the Tapu Fini, both of which aren't great. And while we do have the Stab Scald for the Charizard, like, it's Wing Attack Charizard, man. Like, does Poliwrath want to deal with that? Not a whole lot. So like, once again, Poliwrath does see play in the Ultra League. Counter is an upgrade for Poliwrath, but I don't think it's going to be revolutionary for it in the Ultra League. Where in the Great League, we could be seeing a lot more Poliwrath. And then if you're curious, like, will Mudshot ever see the light of day again? Well, do you ever see Medicham use Psycho Cut? No, didn't think so. So yeah, it's going to be counter Poliwrath from here on out. Then next up, we have Politoed with the Ice Beam, which is a whole lot less interesting than counter, right? Ice Beam Politoed is weird. I really wouldn't call it an upgrade. Like, it is technically an upgrade because our other ice type option would be Blizzard. And Water Ball Blizzard Politoed is a moveset that it runs, right? Like, the advantage over Swampert they're bringing the Politoed for is to at least threaten the opponent with the possibility of you using an ice type attack. More often than not, Politoed likes to go with the ground type coverage because, as we saw with Poliwrath, you know, going with ice water can leave you walled off against stuff, and we don't even have counter damage to kind of make up for it. But in team comps or in metas where using the Blizzard on the Politoed is preferable, the Ice Beam could carry an advantage. Ice Beam is a lower energy cost than what Blizzard is, so you can throw it sooner, but like the damage for how much energy Ice Beam costs, it's like it's not that impressive. And it kind of gets to like the point where Politoed might just want to use Blizzard instead because Blizzard has that bigger nuke damage. Like, consider a flying type swapping into the Politoed, right? If you only get off one charge move, do you want it to be the Blizzard or do you want it to be the Ice Beam? Now, they could shield the Blizzard and that's a big problem, but they could eat the Ice Beam and live and then farm you down still. So it's like, you know, it's just weird. It's weird. There will be matchups where Politoed's going to want the Ice Beam. There's going to be matchups where it wants the Blizzard, team comps, meta. So overall, you're going to want to evolve, you know, a Politoed for the Great League and the Ultra League as both a regular and a shadow version with the Ice Beam, should the situation come up where you'd want to use the Ice Beam. But I don't think it's like, oh yeah, you got to make sure you get this. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's just an option for Politoed. I think overall getting Ice Beam on Politoed isn't going to revolutionize it. We're not all of a sudden going to see any more Politoed than we do now. But it's nice. It's nice. Because there will be those times where you'd want it instead of Blizzard. And then when that time comes, you got it. I think what would have been cooler overall is if we got like Avalanche or Icy Wind, maybe even Weather Ball Ice, because then those are attacks that are low enough energy cost and high enough damage or high enough utility where you could reasonably run like an ice attack with the Earthquake. Ice Beam isn't quite there, so, you know, but there'd be a lot more variety, a lot more options for Politoed if it got one of those better ice type attacks. But we got Ice Beam. So those are my thoughts on the moveset changes with the Poliwag Community Day. If you got any questions on this content, of course, comment below. Let me know what's up. I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, you want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description. One other unique matchup change with the Poliwrath compared to Toxicroak, Medicham, Quagsire, and Swampert is that it's a whole lot worse against Dedenne. Now, don't let that dissuade you from running Poliwrath. In fact, ignore everything else I said in this video. Poliwrath is now the god of Great League PvP. Run it all the time instead of those 4 Pokemon, and it'll go so well for you. Trust me.